dramatic encounter between Arthur Schopenhauer and his mother Johanna and the verdict of history. Personal note: I love Arthur Schopenhauer, and long ago I, along with my friends on the plains and hills of Draban, Dera Ismail Khan, discussed him and his philosophy. This writing and audio essay is my tribute to Arthur Schopenhauer, who had the audacity to challenge his mother, reminding her of her place in history. And indeed, I came to know her through Arthur Schopenhauer. The following writing is inspired by Will Durant's The Story of Philosophy. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in Danzig on February 22, 1788, into a prosperous mercantile family. His father, Heinrich Floris Schopenhauer, was a successful businessman known for his ability, hot temper, independence of character, and fierce love of liberty. When Arthur was 5 years old, Danzig lost its independence following the annexation of Poland in 1793, prompting the elder Schopenhauer to move the family to Hamburg rather than live under foreign rule. The young Arthur grew up surrounded by commerce and finance. Though he would later abandon the mercantile career his father chose for him, this upbringing left an indelible mark, a certain bluntness of manner, a realistic turn of mind, and a practical knowledge of the world that distinguished him from the cloistered academic philosophers he would come to despise. Tragedy struck in 1805 when Heinrich Schopenhauer died, apparently by his own hand. The paternal grandmother had already died insane, casting a shadow of hereditary melancholy over the family line. These early losses and the spectre of mental instability would later inform Schopenhauer's philosophical pessimism. Johanna Schopenhauer, the mother's rise. Heinrich's death liberated his wife, Johanna, in ways both expected and unexpected. A woman of considerable intellect and ambition, she had been unhappy with her prosaic businessman husband. His death freed her to pursue the literary career she had long desired. She moved to Weimar, then the intellectual capital of Germany, establishing herself as a salon hostess and novelist of considerable reputation. Weimar, in the early 19th century, was the epicenter of German culture. Goethe walked its streets, Schiller lectured in its halls, Herder preached in its churches. Johanna quickly made herself indispensable to this world. Her salon became a gathering place for the most distinguished minds of the age. Goethe himself became a regular visitor, appreciating that Johanna welcomed him even when he brought his mistress, Christiane Vulpius, a gesture of social courage that cemented their friendship. Johanna's literary career flourished. She wrote novels, travelogues, and biographies that found eager audiences throughout Germany. At the height of her fame, she was among the most popular novelists of her day, her name known in every literate household. She had achieved what few women of her era could dream of: financial independence, social standing, and artistic recognition. She had also achieved something else. She had become the sole source of the family's income, supporting not only herself, but her son Arthur, who was expected to complete his mercantile training and follow his father's path. The fractious relationship. The relationship between mother and son was difficult from the start. Arthur had been pushed into commerce against his inclinations, and his father's death removed the one person whose authority he respected. Johanna, for her part, found her son's temperament increasingly unbearable as he matured. When Arthur finally abandoned the mercantile career his father had chosen, a decision that amounted to a rejection of the paternal legacy, he turned to his mother for support. Johanna provided it financially, but grew increasingly exasperated with her son's presence. The household that had accommodated Goethe could not accommodate Arthur. The philosopher's own theory of inheritance offers insight into their conflict. The character or will is inherited from the father, the intellect from the mother. Arthur had his father's stubborn, independent will and his mother's sharp intellect, a combination that made him formidable as a philosopher, but impossible as a housemate. Johanna's letter to her son reveals the depth of their discord. "You are unbearable and burdensome, and very hard to live with. All your good qualities are overshadowed by your conceit and made useless to the world simply because you cannot restrain your propensity to pick holes in other people. The diagnosis was acute. Arthur's critical nature, his inability to suffer fools gladly, his tendency to see through pretension and announce what he saw. These qualities would serve his philosophy but poison his personal relations. Johanna, who moved in social circles where politeness was currency, found his bluntness intolerable. Goethe, perceptive as always, tried to bridge the gap. He told Johanna that her son would become very famous. It was meant as comfort, as encouragement to bear with the difficult young man. But Johanna's response revealed the competitive edge in their relationship. She had never heard of two geniuses in the same family. The remark betrayed her sense that there was room for only one talented Schopenhauer in the world, and she intended to be that one. The arrangement they eventually made spoke volumes. Arthur would attend his mother's at-homes only as a guest among guests, not as a son. They could be polite to each other as strangers, they agreed, instead of hating each other like relatives. It was a truce, not a peace. The staircase incident. The truce could not hold. Tensions accumulated through countless small provocations and resentments until they reached a breaking point. The culminating quarrel erupted over what precise cause history does not record, but its consequence is indelibly marked in the annals of philosophy. In the heat of argument, Johanna Schopenhauer pushed her son. Whether it was a shove of rage or an attempt to expel him from her presence, the result was the same. Arthur found himself tumbling down the stairs of his mother's house. The physical humiliation was acute. The psychological wound was deeper. In that moment of dissent, something crystallized in the young philosopher's mind, a recognition of the depth of his mother's hostility, a bitter clarity about their relationship, and a prophecy that would prove remarkably accurate. As Will Durant recounts in The Story of Philosophy, finally, in some culminating quarrel, the mother pushed her son and rival down the stairs, whereupon our philosopher bitterly informed her that she would be known to posterity only through him. It was a remarkable claim for an unknown young man to make to a famous novelist. Johanna, at the height of her powers, had every reason to dismiss it as the spiteful fantasy of a bitter son. Arthur, unpublished and unrecognised, had no basis for such confidence except the inner certainty that marked all his work. He left Weimar soon afterward. Though his mother lived for another 24 years, he never saw her again. The staircase became the final boundary between them. The verdict of history. Time has proven Arthur Schopenhauer's prophecy correct, though not in the simple way he might have imagined. Johanna Schopenhauer's literary reputation, once so bright, has dimmed nearly to extinction. Her 24 volumes of novels, travel writings and biographies gather dust in research libraries, consulted only by specialists in German literature or social historians tracing the emergence of women writers. Her celebrated salon, once the envy of Weimar, is remembered primarily because Goethe attended it and because her son satirized it. She survives in cultural memory as a footnote to greater lives. Arthur Schopenhauer, by contrast, has ascended to the first rank of Western philosophers. His masterpiece, The World as Will and Representation, initially ignored, eventually found its audience and transformed Western thought. His influence cascades through the centuries. Nietzsche borrowed his conception of the will. Wagner dedicated The Ring to him. Freud acknowledged his anticipation of psychoanalysis. Wittgenstein absorbed his epistemological insights. Thomas Mann, Samuel Beckett, and countless other writers have drawn from his well. Existentialism, pessimism, and much of modern philosophy stand in his debt. But the verdict of history is more nuanced than Schopenhauer's bitter prediction allowed. For in reading Schopenhauer, we inevitably encounter the shadow of his mother. Her presence haunts his philosophy in ways both obvious and subtle. His notorious essay On Women, that catalogue of grievances and generalisations, bears the stamp of his experience with Johanna. His pessimism, his suspicion of human relationships, his conviction that life is suffering, these were not merely philosophical positions, but the hard-won conclusions of a man who had known a mother's hatred rather than a mother's love. Durant draws the parallel with Byron, another child of 1788, who suffered similar maternal rejection. These men, he writes, were almost by this circumstance doomed to pessimism. A man who has not known a mother's love, and worse, has known a mother's hatred, has no cause to be infatuated with the world. The staircase incident thus becomes more than a biographical curiosity. It is the emblem of a wound that never healed, a wound that became, through the alchemy of genius, a philosophy. Johanna's shove, meant to expel her son from her presence, ensured instead that she would remain permanently present in his legacy. Every reader of Schopenhauer encounters, in the pages of Durant or the original texts, the story of that quarrel, that push, that prophecy. Johanna is indeed known through her son, but that knowledge includes her own gifts, her own achievements, her own failure to recognise what lived in the unbearable young man she pushed down the stairs. She is remembered not merely as his mother, but as herself, a woman of talent who encountered genius and did not recognise it, a novelist whose works cannot compete with the philosophical system they helped to create. The silence between them, maintained for 24 years, became the space in which that system grew, and the staircase at Weimar remains, in the collective memory of philosophy, the scene of that culminating quarrel, the moment when a mother's rage and a son's pride collided and history took note.